Kirkland's is my favorite website to go to when I need home decor inspiration. With a few things from the Dollar Tree, you can recreate these looks for a lot less. I really like this Christmas swag that I saw on the Kirkland's website, and I went to the Dollar Tree and grabbed a few of the mini Christmas trees so that I could make one for myself. If you've never worked with these mini Christmas trees before, they're pretty flimsy and a little sparse. So I wanted to use two to make this swag nice and full. They do have a little cap on the end that the stand hooks into if you're going to actually use it as a Christmas tree, but it's easy enough to pull that cap off. So you can see here, I started pulling apart all of the branches, and rather than trying to work them so that they form a Christmas tree, I'm pulling all of the branches towards me and fanning them out to the side. That way the back side lays nice and flat and it creates a fuller look. I am going to be attaching these two trees together, so when it came time to fluff out my second tree, rather than pulling the branches towards me, I was just pulling them out to the side so that it would make it easier to place the first tree on top. So you can see I set the first tree on top of that second tree about a third of the way down, and I'm just using some of the branches, since they do have wires in them, to connect the two trees together. If you feel like the branches aren't going to make this tree secure enough, you could use zip ties or pipe cleaners, but I knew I was going to add some things to this that would make it really nice and secure. And you can see here, as I started to fluff out that second tree on top, it is a little more sparse, but I'm going to be adding a lot of things to the top of this that would help hide that. And it'll also help hide the weird shape that comes to the top from adding the two trees together. You can kind of see where it indents, but once all of the embellishments are on there, you won't be able to notice. I wanted to create a little more fullness going down the front of the tree, so I'm using some red deco mesh from the Dollar Tree. I have a piece of floral wire here, and I just wrapped it around the top of my swag, and that's how I attached my deco mesh. I just twisted it on there, and then I started working my way right down the center of the swag. I went down a few inches, maybe about 3 or 4 inches, and I scrunched the piece of deco mesh up, and I grabbed another piece of floral wire, wrapped it around the whole thing, and then gave it a couple twists just to hold it in place. So this is why I said in the beginning that I was okay with just using a few of the branches to hold the trees together temporarily, because now I'm using the floral wire the whole way down the center, and every time I'm doing that, I'm making sure that I'm wrapping both of the trees together and also holding that deco mesh in place. And like I said, I just used about 3 or 4 inches in between each of the poofs of the deco mesh, and that gave it a nice full look on the front of my tree, and it also helped hide the stems that ran down through the centers also. I'm doing a red and silver theme on my swag, but you could use whatever colors you like. The Dollar Tree always has tons of tubes of ornaments in all different colors, so this is an easy way to customize it to fit your decor. Now, I always think it's easier to bundle some of the ornaments together before attaching them to anything. So I'm using some pipe cleaners here. I just cut one in half, and I'm adding either 2 or 3 ornaments to each pipe cleaner and twisting it all together to create an ornament bundle. This is a good tip to keep in mind too when you're decorating your tree for Christmas. I think it's a lot easier sometimes to bundle all of the ornaments together on pipe cleaners, or even those greenery garland ties, and then add them to the tree that way. That way you're not hanging them each individually. So you can see here, I had 1 tube of red ornaments and 1 tube of silver ornaments. I put them all in a bucket just to make it easier to work with. And like I said, on some of them I grouped 3 together, and on some I only grouped 2 together. Now this is where you'll see that the gaps on the Christmas trees are really going to start filling in. I took some of my bundles, and towards the bottom of the swag where it gets a little bit narrower, I added the bundles that I had created with just the 2 ornaments, and I just used those pipe cleaners to twist it around one of the branches, and then I kind kind of pulled some of the branches up through some of the ornaments just to intermingle some of that greenery with the ornaments. As I worked my way closer to the top of the swag, that's when I started using my 3 bundle ornaments that I created. And again, I would just pick a branch, twist my pipe cleaner around that branch, and then pull some of the greenery up through so that everything looked nice and cohesive. And I really focused on where that tree got a little more sparse towards the top of the swag, and I made sure that I tucked some of the bigger ornament bundles in there to help fill in those gaps. I am adding some Christmas florals and a bow to the top of this swag, so I only took the ornaments up so far because I knew the bow was going to take up a good portion of the top of the swag. But you can see here, once all of my ornament bundles were in place, it really filled it out and made it look nice and full. I used more floral wire to attach a few pieces of Christmas florals at the top of the swag, and then anywhere I thought that there was a little bit of a gap on the swag going down the body of it, I had these little silver berry branches on hand, and I did use some hot glue on the stems of those just to tuck them in here and there and help fill out that shape a little more. I'm layering together 2 different ribbons for my bow, and the easiest way I've found to do that is to cut 2 lengths that are the same and lay them on top of each other. I use a little bit of hot glue to attach the 2 ribbons together just on the ends, and then a little more hot glue to make sure that the 2 ends form a loop. So you can see here I got my 2 ends together and I formed a loop out of 1 ribbon layered on top of the other one. Now I do want to create a double bow for my swag, so I'm repeating that same thing again. I cut 2 lengths the same as the first one. I just laid the smaller ribbon on top of the bigger one, and I'm using just a bit of hot glue on the very ends to attach them together to form a loop. I'm using a pipe cleaner here to attach my 2 loops together. You can see I put them side by side, and then I just pleated them up accordion style until they were both cinched in the center, and then I used my pipe cleaner to attach the 2. You could use a zip tie here or some jute if it's easier for you, but I did want the pipe cleaner so that it would make it easier to attach to my swag. I also wanted to create a set of tails for my bow, so again I'm using the 2 different ribbons, and I just laid down one on top of the other and cut them both so that they were the same length, and then using that same pipe cleaner that I used for the center of my bow, I just accordion pleated the tails and attached them with a few twists of that pipe cleaner. As a finishing touch for the front of my bow, I took another piece of both of the ribbons. This was probably about 3.5 inches long. I layered them again, and I just rolled them into a loop, and I hot glued that right to the center of my bow. I used the pipe cleaner to attach my bow to the top of the swag, and there was enough length left on that pipe cleaner that I was able to form a loop so that it would make it a little bit easier to hang. I thought this little drum from the Kirkland's website was really cute, but I wanted to create it in a way that you could also do this with kids. The poster board at the Dollar Tree comes in sheets that are 22 by 28 inches. I cut mine down to 8 by 28 inches, but keep in mind if you wanted to make this smaller, you could too. I just wanted to make mine bigger so that you could see it a little bit better. Now on the poster board, it's hard to see on camera, but there is a shiny side and a matte side, and I always think it's easier to color or paint on the matte side, so I made sure that I had that facing me. Now to get started, I thought it would be easier to get the triangles painted first. So I took my ruler and I laid it at the bottom and I marked a little dot every 3 inches. I did that the whole way across until I reached the end. On the opposite side, I made my first mark at 1.5 inches to start. I had to show you here on the ruler because I couldn't quite get it in camera. But then from that 1.5 inch mark, I just laid my ruler down and I just repeated the same thing. I made a mark every 3 inches until I got to the end of the piece of poster board. So again, on that opposite side, your first mark is going to be at 1.5 inches, and then from that mark, you'll measure out every 3 inches until you reach the end. Now that all of my marks are in place, I can just go through with my ruler and a pencil and start connecting the dots. So I started in the corner and I laid my ruler down till I reached that mark on the top and I drew a line. Then from that same mark at the the top, I laid my ruler down and lined it up with the bottom mark and drew another line. And you can already see the triangles are starting to take shape. So every dot that I have, I just connected one of the bottom dots to the top dot, and then I went the whole way across until all of my triangles are in place. Now, depending on the age of the kid that you might want to do this project with, this is pretty simple. I think older kids could get the measurements down and be able to create their own lines. But if you're working with smaller kids, you may want to draw out their triangles for them so that they can just have fun coloring them in. I drew my pencil lines on pretty dark so that you could see them on camera. So before I started painting, I just took an eraser lightly over it just to lighten them up a bit so they wouldn't show through the paint. Now I'm using paint here because I think it shows up better on camera, but if you wanted to, you could use colored pencils. For little kids, you could use crayons, markers, anything like that. And you could do it in any colors you want. You could even let kids have a great time. I'm sure they would love to do some patterns and shapes and put their name on it and, you know, all that fun stuff that kids do. But I'm just trying to keep mine as close to the Kirkland's one. So I went through and I colored all of my triangles red and green, the traditional Christmas colors. And in order to keep it to look more like the Kirkland's one, everywhere that I painted the green was all on the same side. So you can kind of tell here that the green paint is in all of the triangles that are facing the same direction. And then I went through with the red paint and I painted the opposite triangles the red. Now, if you're doing this with kids, you probably would want to skip this step because it's really not necessary, but I wanted to make sure that the band at the top and bottom of my drum were the same width the whole way across. So I just used my ruler and I marked about an inch down from the top. The Dollar Tree sells all sorts of different colors of duct tape, and I found this really cool silver holographic tape that I thought would look good on this drum. Using those pencil marks, I just lined my duct tape on those marks and I ran down the whole length of my drum, and then I was able to fold the duct tape over to the back side, and it really gave the edges a nice finished look. I also repeated that along the opposite side so that my drum had a band on the top and bottom. I really wanted to create something that looked like the rivets on the Kirkland's drum, and this is definitely not necessary, especially if you're doing this with a kid. But I cut a small piece of cardstock in about the same shape that the Kirkland's drum had on its rivets. And then I took that same duct tape and I just laid a piece of it down on a piece of white cardstock and cut around it. Then I used that little shape that I had already cut out of cardstock and I traced it on to the piece of cardstock that had the tape on it. I'm using the opposite side here so I can see my pencil marks, and then I just cut all of these fake rivets out with my scissors. Now, like I said, if you're doing this with kids, this would probably be kind of a pain in the butt. I'm sure they would lose interest at this point. So if you wanted to do something a little bit different but still get that rivet look on the drum, I would say use some buttons. I think that would look really cute everywhere that the points connect. You could have them glue down a little button or even have them hand draw in something. They could draw in a little rivet, they could draw in a button, whatever they feel like doing. I think that would look really cute. Or you could skip this step altogether because I think the drum looks really good as is. Now here's where I had to improvise a little bit. Originally, I thought I was going to roll this drum around a larger can that I had, but I couldn't find that can, or maybe I got rid of it. So instead, I grabbed one of these small plastic plates that I had and I just rolled the drum around it so that it fit around that plate, and that's what I'm going to use as my base. But it would be much easier to use a can or some other kind of canister that you might have on hand, like a coffee can or something like that. So what I did was I wrapped the drum around it so that it would fit around that plate, and then I just made a mark to where I needed to cut off the excess. So looking back on it, I probably could have measured this first before I started painting it, but it worked out in the end. I didn't have to cut too much of the excess off. Once I had the right size for my drum, then I just used some hot glue to glue the two ends together. I also ran a piece of that duct tape on the inside just to secure that seam a little bit more. Next, I just used a little bit of hot glue and I hot glued my fake rivets on everywhere that there was a point where the two colors came together. And I did that all along the bottom and the top of my drum. As a final touch for my drum, I had some sticky back gems in my stash, so I just peeled a few of those off and placed those on the tips of each of the rivets. You could use buttons here, or you could even skip this step, but I just think it added a really cute embellishment. At this point, if you had a can or a canister that you were using for inside of your drum, I would just fill it with some floral foam and then add whatever picks you like. Now, because I didn't have a can or a canister, I kind of had to build up my floral foam on top of that plate, but I did use a wooden skewer down the center to help keep it stable. I may switch this out later, but for now, it works just fine. An easy way to let kids decorate this would be to get one of the mini Christmas trees from Dollar Tree, stick that down in the middle of the floral foam, and let them add whatever ornaments or flowers they want to it. Little storage bins like this are a great way to add a touch of decoration to your home while also serving a purpose. If you're like me, you probably have a few cardboard boxes laying around from online shopping, and conveniently enough, this cardboard box already had the measurements on it, so I knew the finished product would be 9 by 8.5 by 4. In addition to this box, I also have this piece of fleece material. I think this might have been one of the scarves from the Dollar Tree. I'm really not sure, or if it's just a scrap from something else that I made. To get started, I just reassembled the box with some duct tape and I cut off the top flaps. Then along the bottom of the box, I ran a small bead of hot glue and I started lining that piece of material I had up along the bottom edge. I didn't want to add too much hot glue because I was afraid you would be able to see the little lumps and bumps through the bottom. So that's why I'm just adding it along the bottom edge here. And I'm really not worried about covering the bottom of the box because since it'll be sitting on something, you're not going to see that anyway. I just did that the whole way around the box until I came back to the other side. I got lucky with this piece of material because I had enough to tuck it down over all of the edges and it reached the bottom. But I still wanted to cover up that bottom just in case you would see that a little bit. So using two of those flaps that I had originally cut off the box, I just lined those up and used some duct tape to hold them together. Then I took a piece of coordinating material because I didn't have enough of the red and black check left. And I just laid the cardboard piece that I created on that new piece of material and I cut it out, leaving about 1 inch the whole way around. Using some hot glue, I tucked all of the edges over that piece of cardboard just so that I had an insert piece now that I could slip into the bottom of the box and you wouldn't see that raw cardboard just showing through. Starting along the back side of the box where you could see that fleece come together, I grabbed some burlap ribbon that I already had and I started hot gluing it along the top edge. I glued it down so that there was about 1 inch of the ribbon sticking up above the box, and because the hot glue does seep through the burlap, I was really careful to make sure that I didn't stick my fingers in it, even though I did a few times. And I also wanted to make sure that you couldn't see the hot glue anywhere that would be important. So I'm only adding a small dot at each of the corners of the box and also one small dot in the center wall of each box. I worked my way around the box till I had that burlap in place, and then I went through and in each of the corners of the box I just took my scissors and I cut down the burlap until I was at the top of the box. This just made it easier to fold the burlap into the box. It took out a little bit of the bulk that was in the corners. So once I had all of those slits in place, then I just ran some hot glue along the seam edge of the burlap and tucked it down inside. Keep in mind, this would work well with ribbon also. I just really wanted my box to look very similar to the Kirkland, so that's why I chose to use burlap, but you could do the same thing with any kind of ribbon that you might have in your stash too. To create the leather accents for my storage box, I'm using some of this black leather ribbon that I had, and I cut a piece that was about 8 inches long. I folded it in half. I added a small dot of hot glue right at the fold, and then I added just a small amount of hot glue towards the top of the ribbon to hold it all together. I didn't run hot glue along the whole length because sometimes it shows through because this ribbon is kind of thin, which is another reason that I decided to double it up. Now that I had my little leather piece all assembled, I'm using a little hot glue on the inside. I put it on that burlap, lined my ribbon up, and then folded it over to the edge. This is why I made it 8 inches long, because I wanted to make sure that it dropped down below the edge of that burlap. As a finishing touch, I added a small button to the end of it to make it look like it was buttoned onto the box. And I did repeat that on all 4 sides. I've always enjoyed looking at the pieces of wall art and printed canvases on the Kirkland's website, but they're usually out of my budget. HTVRont was kind enough to send me their manual heat press, and now I can create beautiful pieces of wall art in no time flat. I grabbed a few canvases from the Dollar Tree in different sizes, and I found a huge selection of iron-on transfers on Amazon. I'm going to show you 2 different ways that I use these iron-on transfers with the manual heat press to create wall art. So for the first one, I'm using one of the larger canvases. This one measures 11 by 14, and I'm removing the canvas material from the frame using my utility knife. And then once I had that material off of the frame, I just cut off all of the excess. I gave the frame itself a quick stain with the Antique Wax by Waverly, and then I was ready to start pressing on my image. I've never used a manual heat press before, so I was really excited to try this one out by HTVRont. One of the things that I was really impressed with was how simple the control pad was to use. It's really user-friendly. There's just a power button, a temperature knob, and a timer knob. And it's really easy to turn those and adjust them to the settings that you need for whatever type of iron-on you're using. And I was also really impressed with the protective pad that was attached to the plate of the press. It was nice and thick, and it felt really sturdy on there. It didn't slide around at all with the elastic bands that were connecting it to the plate. I also really appreciated how simple it was to actually swing the top plate out around. It didn't take any effort at all. And you can see here, now that I have my canvas all cut from the frame, I just laid it on that protective pad, and I got this cute little gingerbread transfer from Amazon that I'm going to be placing onto it. It is recommended to lay down a piece of parchment or a Teflon sheet on top of your image just to protect it a little bit more. So I just used some parchment paper because I already had that in my kitchen. Once I had everything in place, all I had to do was swing the arm back over and pull the handle down. This was pretty easy. It didn't take much strength to pull that handle down. And I found that because I was doing this in just one motion, it was a lot easier to use than the handheld presses that I have used in the past. So I really liked that I could just set the timer, and then forget it. The timer does beep whenever it's done, so you know it's time to lift that handle back up. Once my timer went off, I was able to lift that handle back up with no problem and swing the top plate out of the way. The manufacturer of this particular iron-on transfer recommended that you pull the sheet off while it's still warm, so I just let it cool down enough until I was able to touch that transfer plastic, and then I was able to peel it up with no problem. Everything stuck down really nice, and it was really great that everything got ironed on in one motion. Unlike some of the handheld presses that I've used before, I've had to iron on larger images like this in sections because the press didn't cover the whole surface. So it was really nice that I could place all of the image under the heat press and press it all at once. Now there was one little part at the top that looked a little lifted to me, so it was recommended that you place the parchment sheet over it and just press it down for one more second just to make sure everything is sealed in. I also had 2 smaller 8x10 canvases that I wanted to try to put an image right on without removing the canvas from the frame. So you can see here I left the canvas intact, but there is a little bit of a gap underneath there. So all I did was fold up a dish towel and I shoved it into that gap to create a more solid surface. Then I moved the top arm of the heat press out of the way. I placed my canvas onto the protective surface. And the only difference that I had to do when I pressed it this time is there is a knob on the back of the top arm that lets you raise and lower that top plate. So I just turned the knob until I had the top plate raised up high enough that it would make it easy to pull the handle down to press my image. And again, it went the same as the first one. After I pulled that handle down, I just pressed the timer knob on that control pad. It counted down for me, and then when it beeped, I lifted up the handle and my image was perfectly pressed onto my canvas. One other thing that I really appreciated about this manual heat press from HTVRont is that it came with an actual user manual. Sometimes you don't get that anymore with equipment. So I really appreciated that I had a book I could look through to find different temperatures and times, to find different things about the heat press. There's also a section that had frequently asked questions that I found very helpful. So I did find that very helpful, and I was glad that there was an actual book that I could look in rather than going online. Make sure you check out the description box below. I'll have everything linked down there and all the information about HTVRont. They do run sales from time to time, so I think this would be a really great investment piece if you love to customize things for gifts or for your home decor. Thanks so much for coming to hang out with me again today. Make sure you check out the description box for the links to HTVRont. All right, everyone, I hope you have a great week, and I'll talk to you in the next one.